G'day. Today's game is called Vette. This is the third game from the Combat Action Pack that we got when we were kids. This game is different to the others in that it's not really a combat game. It's a open world racing game, and one of the first of its kind, although not strictly speaking the very first. I've got a little bit of a funny story about this particular game. When we were kids, we had never heard of or seen a Corvette, so we didn't know how the name was pronounced. And this particular game we thought was called Vette, which of course sounds absolutely ridiculous now. You just imagine us as kids going, yeah, we're going to play Vette, or I'm going to drive my Vette. Yeah, it sounded ridiculous. But anyhow, as I said, this is an open world racing game. Your objective is to race from one point in San Francisco to another, depending on the course you've selected. Now, you're competing against these European cars, the Porsche, Lamborghini, Testarossa, and F40. You can very much tell that this game was definitely not sponsored or licensed by Chevrolet at all, because those opponent cars generally outclass all of the Corvettes in some way or another in the game. That isn't entirely the fault of the Corvette as a car, but partly due to the game mechanics. For a start, the opponent cars basically have infinite traction and never run into traffic or police, so they don't have any of the issues that you do. And they basically drive perfectly every time. So there's really no chance for you to catch up time if you're driving against a car that is faster than you. Also, the Corvettes themselves handle very poorly at high speed. I'm not sure if this is a reflection of the actual car, but in this game, if you're driving near the Corvette's top speed, you will find that you will spin out all over the place and crash a lot. If you're playing in trainee difficulty, then that won't be too bad because you won't damage your car, and in trainee mode, you also don't get chased by the police. But if you pick, say, professional or rookie mode, the police will chase you if you get caught speeding or doing something else wrong in terms of traffic rules, and you can damage your car. So it's actually very difficult to get through a race without damaging your car. It is possible, and I have actually done it a few times. In fact, the footage in the background here is one of the first times I actually managed to get through a whole race without damaging my car too much and get to the end. Of course, if you damage your car, you can get it repaired at a gas station, but my experience is that you usually damage your car on the motorways where getting to a gas station is basically impossible. So yeah, the racing isn't really the strongest aspect of this game. I guess the most interesting and perhaps cool part of it is being able to drive around in a semi-open world in what is a representation of a real city, San Francisco in this case. Although the amount of city that has actually been modelled in the game is not really all that much. You go driving around and you'll find these big yellow fences that block you off from most of the city. I suppose that's because they didn't have time to really model everything that's in the city, and they just tried to get the most important landmarks modelled where they could. Driving around the city and exploring is actually quite enjoyable. I particularly like how the bridges are modelled in this game. Both the Golden Gate and the Bay Bridge are both fairly pleasant to drive through and reasonable representations of what the real bridges look like, given the limitations of the graphics from the time. Speaking of graphics, they do look a bit dated now, but that is roughly representative of what a lot of driving games were doing graphically at the time. Although I suspect that there are other games that do 3D worlds slightly better than this one does, partly because this is limited to EGA and 16 colours. Sound in this game is pretty woeful. It's basically PC speaker only, and the engine noise is horrendous. So yeah, the first thing you do is you turn off the engine sound because of how horrible it is. Something interesting that this game does that not a lot of others at the time did was this offers multiplayer over serial cable or modem. And I think that probably would have been better than playing against the computer opponents, because that would have been more fair. If the opponent player could be intercepted by the police or damaged as well, I think the races probably would have played a lot better. Unfortunately, we never actually got to try that feature out in the DOS era, because we only ever owned one PC and never had a modem. Typically, we played one of the races in trainee mode, because that allowed you to get the best time. If you look through our scoreboards, all of them are basically fairly fast times in trainee. The other thing that we used to take advantage of was we would just basically drive around the city exploring what we could, just for a little bit of fun, and doing silly things like driving through the middle of a park, which is got a limited amount of novelty. An interesting thing that I found out when doing research for the game was that the Macintosh version is significantly improved over the DOS one. I think this is partly because the Macintosh one came out roughly 2 years later, and it's got better audio and better visuals in general, although I think you do need to have a reasonably fast Macintosh to play it. So that's pretty much all I have to say about Vette. I do have some more footage of me just driving around the city and exploring and finding various landmarks. So if you want to stick around and see what I found, feel free to do so. Otherwise, I'd like to thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time.